Hello, my beautiful friends, my fellow space blobs, earth blobs, sparkly blobs, whatever poetic form you want to describe yourself with. I love it. I am here for it. I personally know and feel my sparkly space blobness. It is a big part of how I move through the world. And we are going to be talking about this Leo full moon, which is all about how we connect to our kind of essence in life. And as I was sitting to prepare to talk about this beautiful full moon happening near the beginning of Aquarius season, right after Pluto's moved into Aquarius, I was thinking about how many people I have been talking to and working with and having conversations with about this feeling of change in the air. So many of us are ready to start expressing in new ways, start opening ourselves up to maybe taking some steps to showing a different aspect of ourselves that we haven't shown the world yet, or maybe that we've been repressing for a long time, or that has been preparing in the background of our lives. And I know a lot of us are feeling quite nervous about that. What's going to happen? What is that going to look like? A little disoriented, perhaps, wondering how to take the next steps, maybe a little uncertain of how safe it is to show ourselves. And I think this full moon in Leo is really a beautiful moment to kind of connect with where we are on that journey and to feel a little bit more safety in that process. So let's talk about this gorgeous full moon and why it could be a really wonderful place of recognition in that journey of becoming ourselves and maybe stepping through the world in a meaningful way. This expressive, unique, and powerful full moon in Leo is happening just a handful of days into Aquarius season. So the sun and Pluto have just moved into Aquarius right before this full moon, which is happening at 5 degrees of Leo. And that's really amplifying our conversation around this Leo-Aquarius axis of self-expression, coming home to ourselves and becoming ourselves time and time again throughout our lifetime. And I just love this, to work with this axis so much, because it really is the place where we kind of explore what it means to be ourselves in the world, which is a pretty big topic, right? Like sometimes I think it's so diffuse, this idea, like what does it mean to be yourself in the world, to be yourself in a situation or in a lifetime? But I think this full moon can kind of help us explore that question and see what answers come up. And one of the first things I was thinking about when I thought about this full moon in Leo was how so often this idea of becoming ourselves and expressing ourselves in life is also often falsely tied to this idea of self-improvement, of chasing the ideal self. I think a lot of our culture is very interested in how do we optimize ourselves into this perfect expression of ourselves. You know, maybe it's through getting a really rigorous routine or pursuing something endlessly through time or always trying to just get to the heart of it. And I think that I want to take that idea of self-improvement off the table completely with this Leo full moon. In fact, I want to do less during this full moon. I want people to feel like you don't have to try and pursue some answer coming through during this full moon. In fact, the simpler, the better, because Leo and Aquarius really is about coming home to your soul song. And your soul song is always just there, you know? And I think a lot of times we think about that soul song as maybe something that's kind of mundane or boring because we've had it our whole lives. We're so used to the way that we are, the creative visions that we have, the way that we move through the day, that it feels like it's not special anymore. So one of the first things I want to say about this full moon in Leo is that this is a really beautiful time to connect with all these things that you kind of take for granted about yourself. All the beautiful elements of your unique expression and being in this lifetime, because Leo at its core, when we're talking about this Leo Aquarius axis, Leo at its core is about giving yourself a seat at the table of your own life. I know often we'll think of Leo in the pop astrology format as being about royalty, the monarchs, the leaders, the heads of state, you know, that kind of idea of having all the power, but that has nothing to do with Leo. That's not interesting. I'm not interested. I don't care. It's about the honor we give ourselves in our lives. And that's not perfect. I have plenty of days where I don't give myself any honor. And this, once again, is not about self-improving ourselves into doing homework, to giving ourselves enough honor. It's just a moment of really giving ourselves that seat at our own table. I mean, Leo is also tied to that playful, childlike essence of creativity and what just brings us joy without having to analyze it, without having to force ourselves to do it. And I think this full moon's really bringing us full circle back to that essential creative expression that we had before we had to think about what we were going to be when we grew up, before we had to declare a major, before we had to tell our boss what we thought our next role should be. You know, this is about bringing us back into our creative essence without all of that kind of improving and treadmill type energetic. But we also have Aquarius in the mix here, right? With this full moon working through Aquarius season. This is a really powerful Aquarius season for insight and illumination through what we're going through. Aquarius is also about self-expression. You know, when you think about Aquarians, like in pop astrology as well, there's always that idea of like Aquarians are the funky ones, the ones that are doing things outside of the box and breaking rules and expressing themselves in unique ways. And I think that is actually a really important part of Aquarius energy, because the only way we're going to find belonging in this life, belonging on our paths and the way we're moving through, is by finding out that it's okay to express ourselves in our own unique way, and that this is one of the ways that we can give back to the world and feel a deeper sense of belonging. So I just wanted to take a moment here to really explore that. And I feel like that would be enough to work with and play with and take with you. And if you're feeling good, great. But there are a couple other conversations that I think are really beautiful here that will add to this experience of this Leo full moon. One of the conversations that's going on during this full moon is that the full moon is going to be squaring Jupiter and Taurus. And what's really interesting about this is I've been thinking about it, and so many of the moons we've been working with over this many months for a long time have connected with the energy in Taurus right now, which is Uranus and Jupiter. And so these questions are questions that have been coming up time and again, and I think we've been working with them for many months. Many of us have been exploring these questions, exploring these longings, exploring what's coming up for each of us. And so when we get to this full moon, you know, full moons are about culmination, about release, about recognition of the process, what's releasing and opening for that next energetic cycle. So I think this is a really beautiful place of perspective. This square with Jupiter and Taurus is really interesting because for me, this is about, you know, following your path, following what's wanting to get expressed next is going to be about breaking some conventional rules. I think that these come from both within and from without. A lot of us will absorb conventional rules in watching television shows when we're growing up, in imbibing from our culture. Just, you know, it's a natural thing that happens. And then subconsciously, a lot of times, a lot of us will kind of feel like we have to follow certain formulas or rules, even though we don't think of it in that way. But I think it's also about breaking the conventional rules that are staring us right in the face about what it has to look like, what your living arrangement has to look like, you know, what your workday has to look like, what your income has to look like, all of these questions that come up. This square with Jupiter, I think, is really asking us about where we feel like we have to hold a conventional shape and why. And I think many of us in this space are very aware of these places in ourselves, right? Like I think many of us have been thinking about this and exploring this and recognizing it, but this full moon is just exploring that a little bit more, kind of coming back to basics. Why does it feel like you're not allowed to wear gender neutral clothes or cut your hair? Why does it feel like you're not allowed to switch careers or move some little pieces around? Why does it feel like you have to play a certain role in a certain social group, right? Like, we don't have to come up with answers here, but just that sight of recognizing that we're going to have to be willing to break some of those conventional rules in order to sing our soul song, right? And that's scary, and I think we need support. We have to support each other here, and I think also we have to practice in a sustainable way so that we're not burning ourselves out from being overly vulnerable and then feeling too stressed about it. So it's definitely about taking our time. But the first step here is just allowing ourselves to feel a little rebellious and feel a little wild and feel like we are going to break those rules if we want to, and recognizing that those rules are arbitrary. A lot of these things that have to do with how we present ourselves, how we express ourselves, how we move through the world are arbitrary, and they aren't as important as I think our survival mechanisms make them out to be. So it's a really great time to think about that. Also, with that whole idea of breaking rules, I think sometimes it is the big flashy life choices, sure, but I think also breaking rules and breaking conventions and doing all that can happen in really mundane times, even by yourself. If you don't like eating breakfast at 7 a.m., but you feel like that's the conventional wisdom, don't do it. You know what I mean? Things like that can also be really, really powerful in reclaiming our autonomy and our sense of belonging in the world. The other conversation that's going on here is a quincunx with Saturn in Pisces. And you know, I love a good Saturn in Pisces moment, so I had to bring this up. And for me, the question that comes up with that quincunx is, do you have faith in your path and your creative expression in this life? There's no right or wrong answer here. Depending on the day, I will have plenty of faith or none at all. So I like to check in with this question all the time. I think I check in with it every day. You know, and if you're not feeling that sense of faith, I think that's so natural, first of all. If you're changing a lot, it can actually be sometimes so disorienting that that sense of like faith and trust in the process can go down a little bit through some of those hills and valleys. I think that's really, really natural. But also, if you're feeling a little bit less of that trust in yourself or your journey, this full moon's great for kind of exploring that. But also asking some questions about, are you allowed to feel that you're held by something bigger? This kind of goes back to those conventional rules. I think in the culture that I grew up in, for sure, and many of us grew up in, it's actually breaking the rules a little bit to have trust and faith in something bigger. Like, there's kind of this rule that you need to be responsible, you need to push yourself hard, you need to just go forward and be practical about everything, and that's what's important. Having faith, having connection to something bigger, having connection to something true that feels true inside of you is kind of irresponsible and floaty and fluffy. And I think that a lot of us feel like we are breaking a rule by allowing ourselves to trust in whatever feels true to us. And I think this is a really great place to just explore that. Also, during this full moon, that means that Jupiter and Saturn are going to be sextiling. And that's really beautiful. It's bringing in this harmonious feeling of something's trying to peek in, something's trying to express itself, something wants to be a part of the conversation. During this full moon, I think a lot of us are going to be having insights about what it is that we're really longing to do. And I feel like I took the very long and winding path to get to that keynote at the end here, that this full moon is really about insights into how we are becoming and changing and growing and becoming ourselves in our newest form and our newest expression through all of these questions that have to do with what rules can we break and what trust do we want to build with ourselves. But at its essence, I think this full moon really is a recognition and an honoring of our changing selves, and that there is something that wants expression. And what we'll do here at this full moon is just give ourselves maybe a little bit of a framework for how to do that in a way that feels sustainable and safe. You know, we're working with fixed energy here, right? Leo and Aquarius are both these fixed signs. So this means about the long game. This isn't about just like a little quick, shift over or an initiation. This is about something that we want to sustain maybe for the next cycle in life. And that means that we don't have to be in a rush to get to conclusions. We don't have to be in a rush to go out and get a full makeover and start expressing ourselves the way we want to express ourselves in our social groups and just burn down every bridge in the world. There's no pressure to do that. If that feels natural to you, great. But I think a lot of us have to kind of practice bringing our true selves out into the world. We need to do it in ways that feel sustainable so we can go and process it and then do that again. It's a really long process. And so it's also just a peek into something that's coming into being and will take a little bit of time to fully land. I am shuffling the cards here and seeing what wants to move through as far as an intuitive message. Strength. I mean, you couldn't be more on topic. This is the tarot card connected to Leo. And I just love this card so much. I'm going to pull this card. I'm going to pull one more just to go along with that, just to amplify the message a little bit more. Eight of Pentacles. This is a strong card. We have been seeing this coming up a lot. This is really interesting. It was just what I was saying about fixed sign energy and the process over a period of time, and not just like in the immediate moment of this full moon or, you know, over the next month or something, but that this is connected to something so much deeper. I'll start with the Strength card though. I haven't had a chance to talk about the Strength card for a little bit. Hasn't been coming up so much, but here it is. So this is about the long process of becoming. When you see this card, there's so many ways you can interpret it. But one of them is that, you know, the lion here represents kind of our wild self, and that our free wild self, which is so beautiful. But that we don't always have to unleash it on everything all the time. That in fact, it's okay for that wild self to sometimes rest and relax and recharge. And that when it's needed and when it's necessary, it will come to roar and do its thing and have this beautiful experience. But this is also about impatience and readiness, because part of the story of the Strength card is that we have this figure here, this lady, working with her wild self. They're connected, they're playing together, they're conversing, they're having this conversation. But part of the thing with the wild self is it just wants to go and do the thing. And the part of ourselves here, represented here with the maiden, the lady, working with this is that this is a reminder too that it's not just about that sprint to the finish line. It's not just about those moments of height and drama and intensity. It's also about the moments of quietness. It's also about the process of doing that. And that you need actually both parts of this, because we have our wild self and we have our rational self, and they're having a dialogue here and they're figuring out their dynamic together. And I think that's so much what this full moon is about, really, is like figuring out what you want that dynamic to be. And also remembering that a lot of the things that are coming into being are going to require kind of a moving between these two elements, and that they're coming in their own time. That doesn't mean that nothing's going to happen. A lot happens in the small movements, but that we don't need to put so much pressure on ourselves to become ourselves tomorrow. It's going to be the process that's important. As we always say, you know, we hear that. Those of us seeking have heard that so many hundreds of times, haven't we? All right, and then we have Eight of Pentacles, which really backs that energy up quite a lot. This is a card of mastery. And that's really the tagline of it, is the student becomes the master. And this is such an interesting card because it works in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, I think this is a really great full moon to acknowledge and honor all you have mastered, all you have moved through, all the courage you have needed to be yourself throughout this life. Wow, that is powerful. You know, I've been talking about becoming ourselves in the next chapter and what that's going to look like in the future vision of it. But as I'm sitting here with this card, I'm realizing that the courage to be you in this life has been massive. And it's a real honoring of that courage, of that journey, and that courage through this lifetime has actually given you a lot of wisdom, and it's given you the necessary wisdom for your next expression. And that's also what this card is tied to, that the next expression is going to be one that involves a process of practice. And that's what Eight of Pentacles is really all about, is practice. You can see this guy has been working on these pentacles and their little shapes for a long time. He's made a lot of them. He's tried a lot of different things out. I think Eight of Pentacles to me is maybe one of the most hopeful, helpful cards to come out, because it's just like, just keep trying. Just keep adding a little bit of yourself into the day. Just keep seeing what feels right and true to you. Just keep playing around. And I promise you, something is going to open in a really beautiful way. The Eight of Pentacles always brings us back to the small things, the small practices that make for powerful change. And both of these cards really speak to that. That you may feel like you haven't done enough, that you may feel like you need to be doing a lot more in your day-to-day so that you can make your dreams come true and that you can become this perfect person, that you can express yourself in the way you want to express yourself because you have an ideal self and you want to get there. It's just like, both of these cards are like, take a breath. Because you're going to get there. And you're going to get there much more easily if you make it a little softer and gentler on yourself. I'm going to be doing an activation for this full moon, a visualization, a journaling session for my patrons. So if you are interested in joining in that, for an all paid patrons, I will be doing that beautiful ritual and activation with you this coming week as we lead into the Leo full moon. So I'd love to see you there for that. I'm also planning and plotting my tarot teaching series over on Patreon because it's been something that I've been thinking about for a long time. I work with tarot in quite a different way than many people, and I think that my approach is really about a sense of freedom and expression, and I really want to support others in finding their unique voice through tarot. So I'd really love to see you over on Patreon. That's where all my extra love and support goes, and it really supports me to keep doing this work here. So I'd love to see you in that space. I hope you have a beautiful full moon in Leo. Please leave a comment. Let me know what is coming up for you. How are you feeling? Are you feeling that nervousness about your next expression, but also that longing for it and that readiness for it? How are you feeling as we move through Aquarius season? Let me know. I love it when you leave me comments. I will see you all so very soon. Have a beautiful full moon.